The field of Democrats running for governor has doubled in size. Former Stamford Mayor Dan Malloy jumped into the race this week. No surprise here. It was expected for some time. The other Democrat, Ned Lamont. Mayor Malloy, thanks for being with us here on this Sunday morning.
Well, thanks for having me.
Our guest panel, Daniela Altamari from the Hartford Courant and Ted Mann from the London Day. Welcome to you both. Good to be back. I want to ask you, first of all, your opponent, Ned Lamont, endorsed the re-election of the Democratic leaders at the General Assembly, Speaker Donovan and Senate President Williams. You in the past, like Lamont, have criticized the governor for the problems in the state, but others say the Democrats are equally as responsible for this budget crisis. Do you support their re-election, and do you believe they should hold on to their positions?
Well, without dodging the question, let me say that to some extent this is a bit of a bipartisan train wreck. The deficit that we're dealing with is structural. It's not as a result of the recession. We did things in Hartford, Democrats and Republicans together, that really were quite foolish. And some of those things are continuing to be done on a daily basis, basically pushing the can down the road for the next governor to have to deal with. You know, constituencies will decide what candidates are elected. I'll work with whomever is elected. But the reality is I, as a Democrat, am prepared to say that we've got to change our direction pretty quickly and pretty dramatically.
Would you like to see new Democratic leadership at the Capitol as well?
Yeah, you're trying to get me into that. I think their constituencies will elect them, and then the House and the Senate will decide who their leadership is. What I am going to say to you is that there will be a very different tone in Hartford if I become the governor. First of all, I'm going to communicate with members of the Senate and the House directly. I'm certainly going to offer leadership. I will never propose a budget that's out of balance. I will veto any budget that is out of balance. I will use that power if I have to.
Daniela?
Speaking of Ned Lamont, your opponent, what's the biggest difference between you and him?
Experience. I mean, the reality is that I have worked in government and done some of the things that has to be done here in the state of Connecticut. Built affordable housing, and thousands of units of housing were built in Stamford while I was mayor. We lowered crime by 64%, making Stamford one of the 10 safest cities in America. In a state that has failed to add jobs since 1989, we added thousands of jobs. We built infrastructure for the next generation. We closed the achievement gap in an urban educational system. We built a universal pre-kindergarten experience. All of those things I did over a 14-year period, on top of having been a former prosecutor, having tried 23 felony cases, having had convictions in 22 of those cases, and a whole plethora of other experiences, including as a small businessman.
This is also a difference between you and Ned. The issue is paid sick leave for private sector employees in the state. I think you've said that legislative proposal is a good idea, and Lamont and others think this could cost jobs, could cut hours. Explain why it's a good idea.
It's a great idea, quite frankly. We don't want waiters and waitresses and cooks in restaurants coming to work sick. We don't want hospital personnel dragging themselves in when they're ill. We don't want daycare workers and taking care of our preschoolers coming to work when they're sick. And you have to look at the specifics of the language. You'd have to work a minimum of 120 days. You'd have to have worked a minimum of 520 hours. This really is public health policy. And quite frankly, if they disagree, if they think 120 days are too few, I'd have a discussion. Maybe it should be 130. But we certainly should see people have the ability to stay home from work if they're ill so that they won't transmit some disease to us. There are other differences between Ned and myself. I want to participate in a public elections process that gets big money out of politics. I supported that legislation when it was before the legislature. I actually talked to some of my local legislators to get them to vote for it. Ned said he supported it at the time, but now that he's running for governor, he's decided not to support it. This is not one of those situations where people should be able to write their own rules and reverse direction.
Back on that sick leave issue, though, can you explain why the jobs concerns that opponents are expressing are not valid criticisms? It may be a public health policy, but people are saying this would hurt the economy right when we desperately need more people working and more hours.
What's interesting is every one of those people probably has sick time. They have the ability to stay home. I want Connecticut to be a great state. I also want it to be a healthy state, and I want it to be a fair state. I don't believe that people will abuse that. The assumption is people will abuse it. Now, also, one of the other factors in there is if you work for an employer who gives you vacation time, you're exempted. because you can use that vacation time. So really what we're talking about is a public health issue. And I believe, as the son of a school nurse and a public health nurse, that it is in the best interest of our health as a state to make sure that people can stay home if they're sick, that they're not forced to drag themselves to work and potentially make you or I sick.
Let's talk about some new revenue streams. It appears right now that Sunday liquor sales, that issue is dead. But you've been for it in the past. What would you do as governor to resurrect it?
No, what I've said is if it got through the legislature, I would sign it. I am not going to veto that legislation. I think that this is an issue that should be debated by the legislature. When the state is ready to make that move, if it's ready to make that move, if I'm governor, I'm going to sign that legislation. I haven't been out proposing as a proponent. Haven't been beating the drum. There is a certain reality that we're one of only 3 states that don't allow it, and I think people are rightfully taking a look and having that debate. I understand the needs of small liquor dealers who may man their shop by one person and have relatively few sales and say, gee, they're going to just simply be spreading their sales out and having to pay more hours of work. I also understand the needs of folks who are near the borders of our state, New York and Massachusetts, who see literally money going across the border and not being spent in the state. We'll get the right balance. If I'm governor, I'd sign that legislation.
What about tolls?
Tolls, it's a great question because there are folks who advocate tolls. The reason I don't advocate tolls is we live in a state where we're already borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. We already take a large portion of the gross receipts tax, which was designed to help us build an infrastructure system, a transportation system. We're already taking that and putting it into the general budget. I do not believe that tolls, the money paid on highways or gas taxes or gross receipts taxes should be going to the general fund. If we built a system that was different, if we had transit authorities, road authorities, highway authorities, bridge authorities, and they were directly funded by tolls, gas taxes, and gross receipts tax, then I might entertain it. But that's not the system we're in, and it would take years to change it.
If the legislature passed a toll bill, would you sign it into law or veto it?
You know what? I've never been asked that. I want to compliment you for it. It's fair. I haven't thought about that. I think in all likelihood, if it was passed, it would be passed only if we set up a system that made sure that those dollars were going to transportation. Only if they were going to transportation would I sign it.
Danielle?
I wanted to ask you about what your plan is to keep young people in the state. We have a big brain drain here. One of your potential opponents, Democrat Mary Glassman, has said Connecticut isn't cool. What would you do to make it cool? What would you do to keep young people here, young college students?
Mary and I get along. I like her a lot. I think Connecticut's pretty cool, by the way. It's certainly one of the reasons that I was able to convince my wife to move from the state that she had grown up in to come to Connecticut. The real problem is jobs. I mean, as of 2008, there were only 2 states in the nation that had failed to grow jobs, Michigan and Connecticut, and Michigan had done better than we had. The reality is we have one of the fastest aging workforces in America because we're not creating new jobs. But let's drill down a little bit further. 48 states created shared somewhere between 16 and 22 million jobs that were created in that period of time. Connecticut had 0. People aren't going to stay in a state that's not creating new jobs. So job 1 of the next governor is to handle the budget. Job 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 is to find a way to create jobs. And that's really one of the things that I did. I mean, we had to change the environment of Stanford, going back to making it cool. We had to change the environment of Stanford so that employers wanted to be there, so that they could have access to the kinds of employees that would, in fact, live in Stanford or in close proximity. Listen, I was a mayor of a city that actually grew population in the state of Connecticut. That in and of itself was quite remarkable.
To follow up on Danielle's question, though, even 10 years ago when the economy was booming, Connecticut still had this brain drain where young people, if they were offered a job in Baltimore and Cleveland or Hartford, they would choose the other places because there was more to do. What would you do, to follow up on this question, to make Connecticut more cool for younger people?
But jobs weren't being created in Hartford. That's part of the problem. But they were being created in certain other places. I think, New Haven has handled that issue pretty well. And certainly in Fairfield County, where there has been a lot of job growth, we don't experience the brain drain that you're talking about. In fact, on a daily basis, people are moving there. People will follow jobs. No one is going to stay in a state to be on no right-thinking person and certainly no right-thinking young person is going to stay in a state to be unemployed. So my job as governor is to create an environment in this state that will grow jobs. Now listen, there are some big things we need to do. We have the highest electric rates in the nation, actually 176% of the national average. We're not going to be a big job creator if we don't tackle that issue. And there are some substantive things that we can do. We can look at purchasing for redistribution our electricity differently. We could get out of ISO New England and create our own power authority. We could have a governor who would lead a drive to lower electric usage in this state by 15%. All of those things I'm prepared to do. By the way, as mayor of the city of Stamford, we lowered consumption in city and Board of Education buildings from 1998 through the present by more than 19%. So I'm not making this stuff up. We can get it done in Connecticut. We can lower our cost of operation. We can create jobs again.
Ted?
Speaking of creating jobs, the other day you were campaigning talking about infrastructure. I think you said you want to be an infrastructure guy if you're governor. What kind of infrastructure? You mentioned commuter rail. And how are you going to pay for it, especially when the state appears to be close to its bonding cap and has been put on notice about what would happen to our bond rating if we keep borrowing?
Yeah, I've met with folks on Wall Street. What they're most concerned about when it comes to New York about Connecticut, is that we're borrowing money to cover operating costs. And we seem not to be backing off of that way of doing business. They might even agree that we can do it once, maybe twice. But what they see in Connecticut is this willingness to constantly go back to the well to borrow money and not make the structural changes necessary to have government survive within its own means. So we have to stop borrowing money for operating costs. That's supposed to come from tax revenue or other forms of revenue, including, by the way, we should stop leaving millions of dollars on the table in Washington. And then we can start to build a system that would allow us to build the kind of infrastructure necessary to compete for jobs in the future.
And what infrastructure is that? Are you talking about?
I'm sorry. I meant to answer that. We need a transportation system that meets the needs of this state. They've been teaching something called just-in-time delivery in MBA programs for over 30 years. But I can name a state, a small New England state, where just-in-time doesn't work because we don't have the highway system to support it. We don't have the rail system to support it. We haven't made investments in light rail systems. We actually haven't even done a very good job with respect to our ports and their usage.
More with Dan Malloy in just a moment. If you'd like to leave a comment about today's broadcast, you can do so on my blog, The Hartfordite, on WFSB.com. We'll be right back. Governor Rell has been criticized because her office spent more than $450,000 on dues to join the National Governors Association. She's not been to a conference since 2008. She's missed 4 of the last 5. I believe 47 governors went last time. Now, she says that you don't have to go, that she can call other governors and so forth at any given time. Do you agree? If elected, will you continue this expenditure?
We're either going to be in it or out of it. We're not going to have one foot on one side and 1 foot on the other. I believe that going to Washington to pursue grant money, to build relationships, is in fact the job of a governor. And I need to look no further than the dismal performance that Connecticut has had in going after any number of billion-dollar potential grants or grant allotments. No money for transportation coming on the Tiger grant basis. No money to upgrade our computerized medical tracking system. Every other state in New England received those monies. Back to the Tiger grant, all but 9 states received those monies. We're not going to receive monies on Race to the Top. That's already been admitted to. I mean, they're already rolling out the bad news. I mean, if you don't fill out the application or leave 120 or so blanks on the application, don't be surprised that you don't get it. But if you have a governor who's not building relationships in Washington, don't be surprised that secretaries don't return the call.
Daniela?
Speaking of money from Washington and speaking of Governor Rell, do you support her plan for the Yukon Health Center, especially knowing full well that the $100 million assumption that the federal government that's built into the health care bill that hasn't passed yet, do you support that plan?
Well, first of all, I think that we're going to go after that money, and apparently there's a good chance it will come to the state. I support the plan, but actually I'm going to tell you something. It's too small. It's too little. and it represents small thinking in the state of Connecticut. The reality is that other states are looking at these types of facilities not to create 5,000 jobs, but 25,000 or 50,000. I believe with one of the top 5 dental schools in the nation, one of the best medical schools in the nation, one of the abilities to attract faculty to a medical research center, that we should have a bigger, broader look. I believe that it's one of the ways to build jobs in the state of Connecticut. And by the way, I don't have to go any further than Yale to prove my point. When you see what Yale has invested in biotech, bioscience, cancer research, and heart research, and how many jobs have been created, and how many new businesses have been created as a result of it, we should stop thinking small in Connecticut. And we should understand that we're competing with states who know how to make large-scale investments in job-producing arenas and, in fact, have been successful. One of the great strengths of Michigan, that one other state that lost jobs, but had that whole auto industry that we kind of forget about, right? They went after these kinds of jobs. They built great medical centers and added on to them. They supported their universities. They don't have a difficult relationship with the private and public universities in their state. We've got to get beyond that. We've got to use these private and public universities and research centers as a way to create jobs and science in Connecticut.
Ted?
You mention all the time that your experience as mayor of Stamford is what really prepares you to be governor. I'm wondering why that translates. Stamford, you were mayor during a period when the financial sector was booming. You're mayor of a city that is very well connected by mass transit to New York City. Why does that make you a good governor to run the state bureaucracy, to deal with a city like Hartford that lacks some of those same advantages, or let alone the vast suburbs and rural communities that are also in this state? How does that translate?
When I was growing up in Connecticut, in my part of the state, we were envious of Hartford. Hartford was the insurance capital of the world. Nothing could stop it. The reality is Des Moines, Iowa is now the insurance capital of the world. We've let a lot of that industry escape, and some of it might have left anyway, but we didn't replace it with anything. You have to be in this game to win it. You have to be going after companies. You have to be knocking on doors. You have to be building infrastructure. You have to be building housing. You have to be making your city and your state safer. You have to control taxes. All of those things I did over a 14-year period of time as the mayor of the city of Stamford, running a city with a $500 million budget, adding 14,000 people, new residents to the city, adding thousands of jobs, thousands of units of housing. I think that track record as being mayor of a reasonably sized city in this nation is a lot like being the governor of a small New England state.
Congressman Chris Murphy has said that the state should be buying more American products, more local products, and you have been a big proponent of keeping jobs in the state and keeping industry in our state at the expense of foreign investment. Yet the state spent roughly $6 million buying foreign cars made in Japanese factories. Not made here, but made overseas. Do you think that's wise policy? And as governor, would you continue it?
Well, I don't want to start a trade war, but I think we should go out of our way to find American products when we spend our money. But I'll give you another, for instance, about the governor. We've ordered buses with this stimulus money coming to the state. We've ordered buses that are going to be made in Indianapolis. I mean, $90 million worth of buses. When we place those kind of orders, we should make sure that parts or assembly or some part of the process is being conducted in the state of Connecticut. Look at this $300+ million of rail cars that we're going to get for Metro North. None of that work, or very little of that work, being done in Connecticut. When other jurisdictions have placed those kind of orders, they've been able to make sure that some portion of it is being done in their state. We've got to be more aggressive. We've got to push back. We have to make sure that suppliers understand that we want Connecticut people to get those jobs. I'll tell you another thing. The idea that a lot of this Amtrak work that's going to be done in the eastern part of the state, down on the bridges, is going to be done by out-of-state corporations and contractors using out-of-state labor is something that really does stick at my craw. If for a Connecticut corporation, construction company, to bid in Massachusetts, you have to have a local office. You have to maintain a local office. We don't have that requirement for Massachusetts contractors who want to do business here. And I also believe that we should reach agreements with contractors to make sure that a large percentage of the people working on those $100 million projects, those billion-dollar projects, if you talk about the New Haven Bridge replacement, are Connecticut workers. It's one way to get our state back to work.
Daniela?
Just a quick follow-up question on that. Do we have companies in the state that manufacture buses? Do we have companies in the state that manufacture rail cars?
We have, well, first of all, other states have mandated portions of that process taking place. We certainly have contractors who could make parts as part of the building of those kinds of vehicles. So, and quite frankly, requiring that a lot of the finished work be done in Connecticut would be relatively easy. What we do have is Pratt & Whitney. What we do have is technology companies. What we do have is a great workforce that is underutilized and has a 9% unemployment rate, the highest we've had since 1976 in this state. So what I want to do as governor is put those people back to work. I'm going to find ways to do it.
Ted?
I'm wondering if you have any instinct toward regionalization, which is something we hear as a buzzword all the time, and we also hear it and see it not implemented. There's no one willing to mandate those sorts of changes or to require that towns work together and be more efficient. I know you've said that you don't think all the good ideas are in Hartford, but if you want some of those savings, doesn't someone eventually have to say that they have to be done?
Well, you know, I do have an instinct for it. I'm kind of chuckling because I was one of the guys who led the drive over a 3-year period of time to get the legislature to approve a law that said that communities could do together that which they were authorized to do separately. I believe in regionalization. I don't believe in forced regionalization of educational systems. I think some of that's going to come naturally. In fact, we have a number of communities in the state of Connecticut doing that. But I also believe that the state should be a partner in doing that. Let's make sure that the monies that would otherwise go to support those individual communities doing those things will in fact flow to the regional entity. I will also tell you that I firmly believe that communities are looking for ways to save money. This is going to be a natural process. So we're going in a very short period of time from a state government that wouldn't allow you to do anything on a regional basis to a state government that does. But let me pick up on one other thing. A number of years ago when I was mayor, we saw a very big hike in the cost of our pharmaceutical benefit package. And what we did in Stamford, and what I authorized us to do, is to create a pool where we would get a number of communities to buy and go out to bid at the same time. We actually lowered our costs that year. And now, instead of having 13 communities, we have 33 communities in that pool.
Hartford is often considered to be the face of the state. It's the capital city. In February of '09, you told the Hartford Courant this: "I'll give you a prediction. I predict that Eddie Perez will rapidly do what's in the best interests of the city, and I think he needs the time to figure that out. But I think that decision is going to come much more rapidly than any of us think." The mayor is refusing to step down even temporarily during his trial, which will be making headlines during the Democratic convention, which of course you hope to be nominated at the city of Hartford. Do you think the mayor should step down temporarily during the trial?
I think he's got to, well, it's a tough issue. I mean, you know, on the one hand, we live in a country where one is assumed to be innocent until proven guilty. On the other hand, we know that there are individuals who are concerned about how does the mayor do his job during a trial. The mayor either has to explain how he's going to do that and comport himself and be able to do the job, or perhaps consider temporarily stepping aside. I think Eddie's got to make that decision.
As a mayor, let me ask you this. I mean, could you have run Stamford if you were in court all day, 8 to 5?
That'd be a tough one. That would be tough.
Good enough. Mayor Dan Malloy, candidate for governor, Democrat. Good to see you back here again. Daniela Altamari, you can read her columns and blog in the Hartford Courant, and Ted Mann from the New London Day. Thank you all for being with us here today.